the story, we go live to Indonesia to talk to Barry Grossman, international lawyer. Mr. Grossman, thank you so much for being with us. So Russia's defense ministry is saying that Russian and Syrian jets have not flown over Aleppo for the past 9 days. This is while the West is accusing them of committing atrocities in Aleppo and of pounding the Syrian city. What is going on?
Well, look, I mean, to be clear, I'm no great fan of Russia, but to listen to anything that the U.S.-led Atlantic World Alliance has to say about Syria right now really requires people to have their heads in the sand like an ostrich. But let's be clear about this. The opposing agenda, that is the one that opposes Russia and Syria, is one which prioritizes regime change over fighting terrorism, and therefore which distinguishes good terrorists from bad terrorists. And that's being objective. Now, this has led to the absurd situation in which the world largely overlooks the fact that the Syria conflict is not a civil war so much as a carefully engineered conflict imposed on Syria by foreign nations, and sees the even more absurd position now, which, despite all the U.S. mischief-making that drove previous ceasefire initiatives, now sees Samantha Powers criticizing Russia and the Syrian government for creating yet another opportunity to let civilians leave East Aleppo. Now, as for this latest debate between Stephen O'Brien and Mr. Churkin, all I can say is this. When it comes to Stephen O'Brien, the Conservative Party stalwart who became UN Under-Secretary General under the Cameron government, I have a simple policy, which is I don't much trust Irishmen who speak with a posh British accent. We know his politics. We know Samantha Power's politics. We know the U.S. position. It's perfectly reasonable for Syria and Russia to expect civilians to leave East Aleppo so that the Aleppo campaign can be finished once and for all for the benefit of all Syrians. What I'd like to say is I would hope that Americans would really stop to ask themselves what their government would do if foreign nations got together, hostile foreign nations, and started agitating for an armed revolution in America and provided training, arms, and political cover for those proxies who, as much as for any other reason, need the money in their wallets, decide to take up arms against their own government. Because in effect, that is what has been happening in Syria. That's not to deny that there are people in Syria who had genuine grounds for complaint about their government. But they're not the people who are taking up arms. They're not the people who are basically working to destroy their government in order to carry out a foreign agenda as proxies for countries like the United States. There is and was a political process for resolving those differences, and they don't require the destruction of a nation. So while I'm no great fan of Russia, I have to say I can't even bother to listen anymore to what people like Samantha Powers and Stephen O'Brien have to say in the UN. And Mr. Churkin's response to the so-called Syria report by Stephen O'Brien was perfect. That is to say, and I'd like to quote him. He said, "Security Council members want to hear objective analysis of the situation on the ground. You clearly did not achieve this," he said to Mr. O'Brien. "If we wanted to be preached to, we would go to a church. If we wanted to hear poetry, we'd go to a theater. Please leave this kind of a report for a novel you might write one day." And I think that pretty much sums it up. I don't know what the Americans expect from Syria and Russia, bearing in mind that they've made no secret about the fact that the Americans and their allies prioritize regime change and, if necessary, completely balkanizing Syria over their professed commitment to fighting ISIL.
Thank you, Mr. Grossman. And another question briefly while we're talking about Syria. Why aren't the militants actually using this opportunity, the lull in the fighting, to leave eastern Aleppo and just put an end to the whole thing?
Well, of course, some were quite infamously ushered out by the UN itself to a safer position. But I think what is clear is that the people who are leading the fight against the Syrian government in Aleppo simply do not want to cede Aleppo to the Assad government, to the Syrian government. So they're not going to leave. Eventually, of course, unless the Americans are able to impose their agenda, eventually they'll have to cede East Aleppo to the Syrian government. But they're not quite ready to do that yet because they've been made all sorts of promises by the United States and its allies about supporting them, because the United States essentially sees Aleppo as the key to achieving regime change once they finish the current operations in Iraq and finish creating basically a safe passageway from Mosul for ISIL fighters in Iraq to come into Syria and finish doing the job that as proxies, albeit very often unknowing proxies, the U.S. has always expected them to do.
Okay. Barry Grossman, international lawyer, talking to us live out of Indonesia. Thank you so much for your time and your thoughts.
Omar joins us now from Oklahoma City. What's the latest on the investigation, Omar?
As of right now, there's no new updates, but officers and deputies, as well as the U.S. Marshal Service, they are still on the lookout. Anywhere you go here on any major highway in the Oklahoma City area, you see a warning that is up telling people to keep an eye out for that 2007 silver Mitsubishi Eclipse. And a lot of people in the rural areas, it's not a big city type setting, they are aware. As a matter of fact, officers are saying they're getting so many calls from people saying, I don't recognize that car that's coming through this area. Can you come and check it out? And deputies and officers are going to make sure that it's not that suspect.
Wow. I have to ask, how did authorities find this hit list that you were talking about, and do we know who was on it?
Well, we talked to the Oklahoma County Sheriff, and he said that that was a hit list that a family member brought to federal authorities, and of course that information disseminated down. They're being tight-lipped on exactly who is on that list. When I asked if you could characterize who's on that list, they said it is family members. As a matter of fact, you can hear in some of the Facebook Live videos that he posted, he is mentioning some family members, and the police department as well as sheriff deputies tell us some of his family members are now in protective custody, just to be sure.
Oh, that's so scary. According to authorities, too, Omar, Vance has a, quote, medical condition and may try to spread the disease. Do we have any more details on what that condition actually is?
The Oklahoma County Sheriff is kind of being tight-lipped about it. He doesn't want to violate any privacy, even though this is somebody who is obviously wanted. They say it's a blood-borne illness, and they said that this was kind of picked up because on the Bolo alert, to be on the lookout that they sent out to law enforcement across the state, that was the last thing that they put on there that, you know, he is bleeding. From what we understand, he was shot in the shoulder in that initial confrontation with police officers in Wilson, so he's bleeding. He has some sort of blood-borne disease, so if officers are going to try to apprehend him, be aware of that. They'll be wearing gloves and whatnot.
Wow, that's interesting. I haven't heard of that before. Authorities also think,
Yep.
Omar, that Vance may be seeking revenge after being accused of sexually abusing a child. Do we have any more information about that?
That charge is coming from a sexual misconduct with a minor. And what the Oklahoma County Sheriff told me was he believes that some of his family members basically set him up for it. From what we understand, he's supposed to be in court in about 2 weeks on that charge. He had bonded out on a $25,000 bond, but then is now going on this rampage. So that sexual misconduct with a minor, you can now tag on shooting 2 cops and possibly 2 murder charges for his aunt and uncle, and the Oklahoma County Sheriff tells me that those could be punishable by death here in Oklahoma. So he mentioned that, you know, this Michael Vance is desperate and things could get worse. They're hoping, though, that he's suffering from his wounds at this point and that either he turns himself in or somebody sees him. They do think that he still has that AK-47 with him. During one of the attempted carjackings, somebody had a confrontation with him and was able to grab one of the magazines and throw it. They believe he still has ammunition, maybe one more magazine left, but with a powerful weapon like that, they're telling law enforcement and, of course, citizens to be careful. Interesting note, I've lived in Oklahoma before. In parts of the rural areas, Michael Vance doesn't have to keep an eye out for the armed officers. A lot of the farmers out here also have rifles. They're hunters.
Yeah.
And the Oklahoma County Sheriff told me that a lot of these people, they will protect their property and they don't take too kindly to people shooting officers.
Wow, Omar, so many twists and turns. Serious case, but wait till the movie comes out. This is crazy.
I know.
Omar Villafranca, thank you so much.
Thanks, Jamie.